Hey all you bitizens of the internet, welcome to Learnabit. It's October 24th, 2020, and with everyone talking about the 2020 US elections coming up in just a few days, I wanted to do a very different kind of video than I usually do and talk about election forecasts and how elections work in the US. We're going to examine a professional election forecast by FiveThirtyEight, insights about where the presidential race currently stands, and how campaigns are thinking about strategy with only a few days left before the election. Now, I promise this isn't going to get political, and I won't share my own opinions. This is just to understand a bit better about how polling, forecasting, and the election system works in the US, and also what we're likely to see once all the votes are counted. So please don't kill me, and let me know what you guys think. All right, welcome to Learnabit. I just wanted to say a quick sorry for the delay in video production and a big thank you for being patient. This has been an incredibly busy time for me. However, while I haven't been putting out many videos, I have been doing a ton of work to improve the channel, including adding this brand new classroom. What do you guys think? So anyways, there are already so many great YouTubers with videos explaining the sometimes bizarre and definitely uniquely American Electoral College. So I'm just going to cover how it works very quickly here and link to some more in-depth videos down below. Essentially, the founders were concerned by something. When the US was drafting its constitution, modern republics hadn't really existed on such a large scale. Most people didn't really have the capability to travel far or frequently to get to know the nation or its leaders as a whole, so how would they know who to vote for? This was before political parties and party platforms, so voters had no shorthand to know the policies of each candidate. They had to individually learn what each person was for or against and the specifics of their policies, which is challenging enough for many people even though now we have the internet. So how could citizens spread out over hundreds of miles in this huge new republic possibly have enough information about candidates they would likely never meet or never see to make an informed decision about something so important? In the early debates about drafting the Constitution, two main plans the Founding Fathers put forward actually originally proposed that Congress should elect the president, and that people would simply elect Congress, their local representatives, because local is what they knew. However, after some debate, they compromised and established a separate body, the Electoral College. In this system, each state would be allotted a certain number of representatives based on population, and those representatives, or electors, would elect the president. The people of each state would vote to indicate to their state's electors who they would like them to vote for. Many states have laws requiring the electors to follow the popular vote of their state, and even in those that don't, it's incredibly rare for an elector to go rogue, but every now and then you will see a couple of them, so-called faithless electors. Alright, so the president is elected indirectly, and because of this, the US presidential election is less like a single national election and more like 51 smaller elections. All 50 states, plus the special capital district, the District of Columbia. There are 538 electoral votes up for grabs. Each state's electoral vote is equal to their number of House representatives, which are proportional to the state's population, plus 2 for each of their senators. Each state has 2 regardless of size. So Wyoming, the smallest state by population, has 1 representative and 2 senators, so it is worth 3 electoral votes. California, the largest state by population, has 53 representatives and 2 senators, so it has 55 electoral votes. DC famously has no representatives or senators in Congress, but it is still given the default 3. With only 2 exceptions, Nebraska and Maine, the winner of the state takes all the electoral votes. A candidate has to get 270 electoral votes, or just 1 more than half, to win. Got it? Cool. Alright, now let's look at a map and look at some forecasts to see where this election stands today on October 24th, 2020. We'll be using the FiveThirtyEight statistical model and forecasts, as well as the many polls they collect in order to inform our election map here. They're a very rigorous political forecaster and among the most respected in the field, so go check them out after this video if you want to check my work here. Now, there are 2 things we could look at. The forecast, or what FiveThirtyEight currently thinks the final election results will be based on statistical analysis, and the polling averages, or where the average polls say the candidates stand today. Now, we will be mapping the forecast, this winding snake model here, because we want to know about the election overall, not a snapshot of just where things stand today, since these polling averages go up and down all the time. Now, the only time I may speculate on why one candidate or another may be more likely to win a state is when the race itself is polling too close to call, and it will all be based on some previous voting history, trends, and the 538 model. And I'll signal this by saying something like, if I had to guess. So for our map, we'll arbitrarily be going from west to east, looking at each region of the US to understand regional trends and which regions are most important this time around. Among these regional trends, I'm going to include interesting ideological leanings and demographics, as those tend to be somewhat good predictors for why a state votes the way it does. More urban, ethnically diverse, college-educated, and liberal states tend to vote more for the Democrats, while whiter, more rural, non-college, and more conservative areas tend to vote more Republican, although there are some important exceptions. I'll be putting up the states on the map like this. 0 to 2% advantage for a particular party in the polls. A candidate is polling between 0 to 2% better than their opponent, will be listed as tilt. 2 to 7% will be lean, 7 to 15% will be likely, and a 15% advantage will be safe on this map. All right, let's go. First, there are the non-contiguous states, Alaska and Hawaii. Alaska is a fairly conservative state, but it kind of marches to its own drum and actually has a very libertarian and pro-environmental streak. Seriously, the politics of Alaska are fascinating. Now, Alaska is notoriously difficult to poll due to its sheer geographic size, but it seems Trump isn't doing as well as Republican candidates usually do here. In 2016, he beat Clinton in the state by a high likely margin at 14.7%, almost reaching the 15% safe mark. But today on October 24th, 2020, he's only polling around 5.7% above Joe Biden on average. 538 forecasts Trump winning by about 7.6%, making it a likely Republican state. Now, Hawaii is one of the most reliably Democratic states. Demographically, the population is very ethnically diverse and mixed, and Hawaii is actually the only state where Asian Americans make up the largest ethnic group in the population. It is safe Democratic. Next, we've got the West Coast, comprised of Washington, Oregon, and California, a very diverse and metropolitan region known for its liberalism. Washington, Oregon, and California are all polling safe Democratic. No surprises here. And this already brings Biden up to 78 electoral votes out of the 270 needed to win. Now we're in the Northwest, which includes Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana, one of the least populous and most rural regions of the country. These areas are very Republican, heavily white, and conservative, although Montana, like Alaska, has an independent streak and sometimes elects Democrats to statewide offices like senator or governor. Idaho and Wyoming are safe Republican, and while Trump won Montana in 2016 by a safe margin over 20% above Clinton, it is currently polling less well this cycle. 538 forecasts Trump winning by about 9.2%, making it likely Republican. The Southwest is going to be one of the most critical battlegrounds this election, and it's comprised of Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. The Southwest is one of the fastest growing regions in the country, and while it is somewhat sparsely populated, its population is concentrated in large and rapidly growing cities. Very importantly for this election, the Southwest has a large and expanding Latino voting bloc, which here is overwhelmingly comprised of Americans of Mexican descent. Mexican-American voters, as well as Latinos in general, tend to skew towards Democrats. Just over 2/3 of the total Latino vote usually goes to Democrats, and between a quarter to a third of the Latino vote goes to Republicans. However, eligible Latino voters also tend to vote at far lower rates than other groups, so some pundits are saying that the question this year isn't so much who will these voters favor, but rather will they turn out? This turnout question will be pivotal, so if Democrats want to win here, they need to focus more on voter turnout and education, while Republicans need to focus more on persuasion. Nevada is almost entirely centered around Las Vegas and is a notoriously hard state to poll. Trump was actually forecasted to carry Nevada narrowly in 2016, but it went for Clinton by 2.4 points. It is currently forecasted to go to Biden by 7.5%, just over the 7-point likely Democratic threshold. New Mexico is interesting in that its population has the highest percentage of Hispanic Americans of any state, and they are the largest ethnic group in the state at around 49%. It is likely Democratic in this election, forecasted to favor Biden by about 13.3%. Colorado used to be a swing state and still is seen by some as one, but it has voted reliably Democrat since 2008. Its politics are largely centered around Denver and the other Front Range urban areas like Pueblo and Colorado Springs. It is currently forecasted to go to Biden by around 11.5%, likely Democrat. Utah is another unusual state in that its population is majority Mormon, and politics here center around Salt Lake City. They tend to be one of the most Republican and conservative states. Republican Mitt Romney won with over 70% of the total vote share in 2012, but they don't appear to be as enthusiastic about Trump. They disproportionately backed the independent candidate Evan McMullin in 2016, so Trump won the state with only 45% of the vote, and their Republican Senator Mitt Romney has been a very strong critic of Trump, being one of the only Republicans to vote to impeach Trump earlier this year. Utah will remain likely Republican, with Trump forecast to win by over 14.8%, but this is a shocking decline from only 8 years ago when Romney carried the state by almost 50 points over Barack Obama. Arizona is a state everyone is talking about this election. The largest electoral prize in the region with 11 electoral votes, the Phoenix metropolitan area is currently the fastest growing city in the nation, and it is dominating the state's politics. Up until the 2018 midterms, it was a Republican stronghold, the home of such Republican icons as former presidential candidates Barry Goldwater and John McCain. Suddenly, however, it shifted away from the Republicans in the 2018 midterms, surprising everyone with a flipped Senate seat and almost an entirely Democratic House delegation. Biden is predicted to be the first Democrat to win the state since 1992, narrowly winning by about 2.5%, lean Democrat. This next group isn't a super well-known group, and it's not super common, but sometimes these states are collectively called the Red Wall. I'll explain why I'm grouping them in a minute, but for this video, I will just be calling them either the Red Wall or the Great Plains Midwestern states: North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. These are very rural, white, and conservative-leaning states, which almost always go safe Republican. Like I said, it's occasionally referred to as the Red Wall. North Dakota, South Dakota, and Oklahoma are currently safe Republican, but consistently, polls from Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska are all showing features similar to Alaska, Montana, and Utah: lower levels of support in usually solid Republican states, which is why I wanted to highlight this Republican heartland region. These Red Wall states will almost all certainly still go for Trump, but it signals that there may be some serious cracks in his popularity among independent or more moderate Republican voters. If there's weakened support here and in other usually solid Republican states, it's a warning sign that other more vulnerable regions may be in trouble too. Kansas is a traditionally safe Republican state, which went to Trump by over 20 points in 2016, but it is now polling only around half that number and likely Republican, with a surprisingly close Senate race. Its neighbor Missouri, formerly a bellwether swing state that in recent years has swung solidly towards Republicans, is also predicted to only be likely. Now, Nebraska is fascinating because it is one of only two states, the other being Maine, that divides its election by congressional districts, instead of having a winner-take-all system like every other state. In addition to the two so-called at-large electoral votes a candidate gets for winning the state as a whole, each of the three congressional districts holds its own smaller election. Whoever your congressional district votes for is who carries that elector. Trump is forecasted safe to win the at-large electors and the 3rd district, the most conservative district in the country, and likely to win the 1st district. However, the 2nd district is unusual because it contains the city and suburbs of Omaha and swings back and forth between Democrats and Republicans. It is forecast as lean Democrat at plus 4.6% for Biden. Texas is a region unto itself and perhaps one of the biggest surprises of this election. Texas, the 2nd largest electoral prize in the contest with 38 electoral votes, formerly touted as the Republican California and a reliable conservative giant, is a possible swing state this time. Texas is now demographically a majority-minority state, with Latinos making up about 40% of the state's population. Its metropolitan areas are among the largest and fastest growing in the nation, and its suburbs in 2018 swung rapidly to the left. Romney beat Obama in 2012 by almost 16%, and Trump won in 2016 by 9%. But after an astounding midterm election in 2018 for Democrats, Texas is now polling at only 0.7% for Trump on average. When I saw this polling average, my jaw hit the floor. A tilt Republican margin in a very traditionally conservative state that hasn't gone to the Democrats since 1976. Now, 538 also gives the odds of a state going to either candidate, and they say that about 2 times out of every 3, Texas will probably go to Trump, and their forecasted vote margin is actually plus 2.3 points for Trump. So, if I had to make a guess, I would predict Texas will go to Trump by maybe a couple percentage points. Texas has some of the strictest voting restrictions nationally, and it has such a long history of voting Republican. However, it wouldn't be unexpected for Texas to just barely go to the Democrats, which would signal not only an almost certain Trump loss, but also a very serious problem for the Republican Party long-term if they were to lose Texas. If Trump wins Texas, he starts to catch up to Joe Biden after trailing for a long while here. Now, we've reached the critical battleground of this election, the upper Midwest and Great Lakes regions, often called the Rust Belt because in recent years it has experienced large-scale industrial decline and population shrinkage. This is the region that will almost certainly decide the election. It was once the undisputed heartland of American manufacturing, but has since faced hard times economically due to automation and the movement of manufacturing overseas, which have caused massive population and job losses. Industry and factories are still central, as is mining and natural gas extraction via fracking. If you've been puzzled about why during the presidential debates the candidates were both going on and on about fracking, it's because Pennsylvania, arguably the most important state in the race this year, is the nation's second largest producer of natural gas, largely via fracking. This region has long had important bellwether and swing states like Ohio and Iowa, which regularly swing back and forth. But Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Minnesota were largely thought to be solidly Democrat and were even nicknamed the Blue Wall. In 2016, however, this was where Trump won the election in a surprise upset, flipping Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and came within 1.5 points of flipping Minnesota, the state with the longest streak of voting Democrat in the entire country. While he may have only won Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania by a few thousand votes each, he dramatically flipped and won Ohio and Iowa by over 9 percentage points. Whereas the South and Southwest are moving leftward towards the Democrats, this region has actually been moving to the right as it is disproportionately made up of white voters without a college degree and blue-collar white voters. However, in another surprise, this region has swung towards the Democrats recently in this election in ways that would have been unforeseeable immediately following the 2016 election. Biden is likely in Minnesota by 7.5 points, a good sign for his campaign. Iowa is a complete toss-up, and Trump is forecast to win by just 1 point in Ohio, so the races are anyone's game and both forecasted tilt Republican currently. But this is too close to call. If I had to make a prediction, I think Trump may very narrowly pull out a victory in Iowa and Ohio, as both tend to vote to the right of the national popular vote, and both are largely rural. Indiana, previously a safe conservative state that is home to Republican Vice President Mike Pence, is only likely a Republican in this election. As usual, Illinois, a state dominated by the Chicago metropolitan area in the north, is safe Democratic. However, the 3 fiercest battlegrounds, the ones that decided the last election by razor-thin margins, and the ones you're going to probably hear about nonstop during the election, are Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Today, Biden is forecast to win in Michigan by 7.4, making it likely, as well as in Wisconsin by 6 and in Pennsylvania by 5.5%, making both these states lean. If Joe Biden were to win all 3, he would be extremely likely to win the election. All right, now we've just got 2 regions left. First is one of the most liberal areas of the US, the Northeast and Eastern Seaboard, stretching from Maine to DC. There are a lot of small and large states here that tend to vote overwhelmingly for Democrats. Now, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, the home state of Joe Biden, Maryland, and the District of Columbia are all safe Democrat. And notice that with that, Joe Biden has passed 270 electoral votes and would be the next president of the United States. However, we're not done there. Biden is likely in Maine at over 11.9%, but like Nebraska, Maine has 2 at-large votes and splits its other 2 electoral votes by congressional district. The first district is safe Democratic, but the second is a toss-up, only forecast to go to Biden by about 0.1%. And I'll be honest, I am kind of iffy on this one. Trump certainly has a good shot here because of how surprisingly and solidly he won in 2016, and the district is largely rural and white, but it has voted for the Democrats for a long time, and it'll be close this time. Currently tilt Biden, but too close to call. New Hampshire is another swing state and only went to Clinton by just over 2,000 votes in 2016, but is now forecast as likely Democrat at plus 10% for Biden, showing just how much the country has potentially moved away from Donald Trump. Now, Biden is at 278 votes. Finally, we've arrived at the South, historically among the most solidly conservative and Republican regions in the country, but now a rapidly growing and diversifying contested battleground where Democrats see room for growth. This is traditionally where Republicans run up the numbers in both the popular vote and Electoral College. Now, much of this region is rural, religious, and staunchly conservative, and will remain in Trump's column. Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia are all polling safe, while Mississippi and South Carolina are forecast as likely, in large part due to large populations of black voters that skew almost entirely Democratic. However, Virginia, once a conservative Republican stronghold, has flipped to become a reliably Democratic state due to massive population growth in the north of the state around D.C. It is now likely for Biden. Now, a big surprise of this election has been North Carolina becoming a swing state, just barely leaning Democratic at a forecasted plus 2.3 points for Biden, but the complete shock was Georgia becoming a complete toss-up. The candidates are dead even, and the race honestly could go either way. The cities in these states have seen large population growth, diversification, and movement leftwards, particularly around Atlanta, Charlotte, and Raleigh. Black Americans are a large and critical voting group in this region, and in large enough numbers may be the decisive factor in these states. My safe guess would predict Trump would just slightly edge out Biden in Georgia by a few votes, as it is another state like Texas where it is much more difficult to vote, and it went for Trump in 2016 by over 5 points. However, Biden may very well take North Carolina, a state Democrats have been after forever. Now, finally is Florida, the third largest electoral prize and the eternal swing state. Really, Florida should be like 6 different states. There's a saying that in Florida, the farther north you go, the more southern you get. And that's very true in some regards. North Florida aligns very heavily with the rest of the South in that much of the population is white, conservative, rural, and religious. But this couldn't be more different from other regions in the state, such as South Florida. Miami and other surrounding regions are overwhelmingly Latino, and it is the center of the massive Cuban vote, one of only a few Latino groups in the nation that skews Republican. In Orlando, you have a large Puerto Rican population, which is very Democratic, and interspersed throughout are about 20 other different Latino groups, a sizable African American population, and a large community of retirees and older voters. Florida almost always decides the election, and this election may go that way as well. The state is almost evenly matched every time between Republicans and Democrats, and Trump especially needs to win this state if he wants any pathway to victory. However, Biden is currently forecast to win by over 2.8%, and I'm shocked to be saying these words, but the margin in Florida appears to be large enough for a lean Democratic classification. And that wraps up our 538-based election forecast, with Democrat Joe Biden winning the presidency with 335 electoral votes, and the Republican Donald Trump at 203. Joe Biden is projected to win by around 30 more electoral votes than Trump did 4 years ago. So a very resounding victory that could grow either larger or smaller depending on how the toss-up states of Iowa, Ohio, Maine's 2nd District, and Georgia, as well as the closer lean states, Arizona, Texas, North Carolina, and Florida, go. If Biden wins all of these, he would have 413 electoral votes, and Trump would only have 125. This would be the largest margin of any Democratic win since Lyndon B. Johnson in 1964. If Trump outperforms and wins all these states, he would still not win, as he would only have 259 electoral votes, but Biden would win by a far smaller margin, only 279 electoral votes. So that Rust Belt trio of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are the true prizes that could flip this election one way or the other. Now, if you want to know more about the model that was used to try out your own combinations to win, you can find it and play with it yourself at FiveThirtyEight.com. The interactive map is from Yet Another Political Map Simulator, or yapms.com. And I hope you guys like this video and the format. I know it's very, very different from what I usually do, but if you believed it deserved a like and a subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. And be sure to tell me your thoughts on the format and the video down in the comments below. If all you Bitizens like it enough, I might actually do a Senate explanation forecast as well. All right, this has been Learnabit. Thank you very much for watching.